stop.
Right, no, not that I know of. I mean, some people pay more attention to the divisions of the topical divisions as opposed to the pages, but no specific learning cycle that I know of, yeah. Okay, Boker Tov, we're learning laws of Kashrut. Getting started again. Good morning, good morning. We're finishing up the laws of Chaylev, forbidden fats. And we have to complete the topic with a very similar prohibition. A certain part of the animal that has to be cut out, cannot be eaten, even if it was kosher, a type of animal. It's kosher slaughter, and it's not a treifa. It doesn't have any blemishes in it, and it's healthy. Still, there's sections which cannot be eaten. We mentioned the chaylev, and we said that there's another whole topic about the blood that can't be eaten. And there's one more topic, and that is Gid HaNasheh. Gid HaNasheh, we all know from the story of Yaakov fighting Esav, the Torah tells us, or not Esav, the angel, that according to Chazal, he was representative of an angel of Esav, and he was saved, but he came out limping because he was injured in the sciatic nerve. And so since then, the Torah says, from then, the Jewish people do not eat the sciatic nerve. So there's basically some kind of, as opposed to the forbidden fats, which we said are usually quite distinguishable, they're chunks of fat. And then, of course, we're machmir, because it's such a strict prohibition, to even go with the sort of fat which clings on to those chunks, and we take off quite a larger section of the fat near the kidneys, we said, and near the loins, the ksalim, and also on the actual intestines. So there's three major parts. Here we're talking about a nerve. A nerve is like a string. It's like a string which is attached to the thigh bone. The thigh bone is called the thigh. It has like a shape like a spoon, because it's curved. It's curved. So the sinew which goes through that curved area, that spoon-like curvature, that is forbidden to eat. We have to take it out. Now the truth is, biblically, that section of the sinew is only about 8 centimeters long, and in a cow, and in a sheep it's only like 4 centimeters long. It's this big. But we're machmir, we take off the entire sinew all the way from where it attaches to the spine, all the way down to the knee. We remove that entire sinew to its entire length, and it's pretty easy to see. You can actually take off that sort of string, but we're machmir, as I said, and not only we're machmir that the entire length from the spine all the way to the knee, we also take off there's extensions. They're called knot in Hebrew. The extensions are sort of, they branch off from that sinew. We forbid that as well. And so it actually comes out to be quite a bit. And here's where it gets sticky, is that you have to be quite an expert to sort of get all those branches off from the sinew that sort of are intertwined within the flesh. You have to make sure to get them all. And in order to get them all, you cut into the meat. It's quite an expertise to be able to cut into the meat. As we were saying before about the chaylev, it's very similar, and maybe even a harder thing, to cut out all the sections of these branches of the Gid HaNasheh. Some people say that this Gid HaNasheh, this sciatic nerve, is forbidden because it's associated with the lower parts of our body, right? It comes from the thigh. The thigh is oftentimes associated with the sexual organ, and therefore our lowly desires, Esav in general, right? Yaakov was fighting against Esav, so it's the powers of evil. And so there's a lot of explanations why, Yaakov went back to fight with this angel, because he went back over the what river was it? Yabok River, very good. 1 second, Moshe, 1 second. And so it's quite symbolic of fighting the evil forces, maybe the lower forces, the forces of darkness, the forces of desires, of physical desires. And also, the thigh is what connects us gives us standing, to be able to stand in this world. And you got to make sure that you have what do we say? That Yaakov he was the one that had the dream of the ladder, right? It said that the ladder its legs were in the ground, and the head of the ladder was in the sky. And so we want to have, as Jews, we want to be spiritual, we want to be holy, and we want to be good, but we have to be connected to this world. We have to be applying that in the mundane life. And so this is a very symbolic mitzvah of that, and that's other than it being a prohibition in the Torah, it's very significant. So there's nikur. We mentioned it the other day that there's a process of nikur. We said our traeger in Yiddish is to digging out those portions of the chalev and those portions of the sciatic nerve and all the branches which go out of that nerve, and you really have to have quite a tradition about exactly how it's done. And there's more machmir traditions, and some people, they just sold the entire hind leg because they over the course of the generations they didn't have the tradition passed down exactly how to get rid of all those different branches. And some people are machmir, but obviously when the communities that didn't, if they had who to sell it to, you could be easier, more machmir, it wouldn't cost you as much. But if you were just a lone community, you would need to be make sure you had that tradition, so you wouldn't lose so much of your animal. Bottom line is, today there is a tradition we do follow, and there are some places where they don't eat at all any of the hind leg, but there is room to be lenient nowadays. It's quite common that the people that do the nikur know how to get rid of the chalev and all the different parts of the gida nasheh. And you have to make sure that they know what they're doing, of course. Yes, Moshe?
So, building on what you were talking about last week, we don't eat the sciatic, we don't eat meat unless the sciatic, from the rear of the animal, unless the sciatic nerve has been properly removed, because it could lead to mixed dancing.
Yeah, you got it. You're right. This is a joke we said last week, which is quite commonly known, is that whenever the rabbis are always worried about, now that we live in a westernized culture where there's so much mingling of the sexes, and this issue of, are the Orthodox Jews participating in dancing, which is mixed between men and women. This was a big fight that the rabbis had to fight, and so they... Sorry?
Modern Orthodox versus Haredi.
Not necessarily. Those divisions are very social. It's hard to define them. But even within the beginning, these divisions were not clear. And even today, modern Orthodox maybe are still fighting the fight. And there's some people that still falter and are drawn to dance mixed, which of course is forbidden. But anyways, it's a good joke. And every joke that you have to explain, it ruins the joke.
I didn't hear the joke.
Yes, you with your wife. Many times the rabbis will say this is forbidden because if you allow this, then this will allow something else, and then if you allow that, in the end of the chain is going to be it'll lead to mixed dancing, right? That's like the worst prohibition possible. So that's the joke. Don't eat the sciatic nerve or be machmir on it because it might lead to mixed dancing, right? Because he was saying that's appropriate because we're saying that there's this particular mitzvah actually is connected to, staying away from the desires of the flesh. But any joke that has to be explained just doesn't come out right. Just doesn't come out right. But if you have to explain it, then it's just not funny. So, sorry, Moshe. But,
I have to disagree with you on that.
okay. Okay, so anyways, that was the end of basically the section. We put together the Isser of Chaylev, which is karet, and the Isser, which is of Gidan Nasheh, which is not karet, but it's still forbidden. And you got to make sure to have good people in charge of the kashrut of the meat, and they know how to do the proper nikur. As I said before, in the Jerusalemite style, where they took a lot of chumras from different countries, when they all gathered in Jerusalem in the 19th century, you lose about 20% of the meat. Whereas if you're going to be more lenient and follow specific countries where they are not taking everybody else's customs, the chumrah of everybody, you can get away with only losing about 10% of the meat. That's a Yemenite custom and a Moroccan custom, where they still had a very strong tradition about how to get rid of all the, cut out all these different branches of the forbidden parts. And Bezrat Hashem, when the Beit HaMikdash will be built, we're going to need to know how to get rid very specifically of all those forbidden parts, because there it's not just forbidden parts. There they have to be brought onto the altar, and whatever has to be brought onto the altar has to be brought there. And so you have to be able to, in the future, maybe we'll be more experts at dividing up these permitted or forbidden parts of the meat, of the fats, and of the sinews, and maybe Mashiach will come and clarify all of our doubts about all these different parts. But for now, this is the way it is. Okay, last questions about this topic before we move on to the next topic. With your permission, what I'd like to do is, the next topic we should do is blood. Right? It's another part of the meat which we can't eat. But with your permission, I'd like to skip that. We'll come back to it. The laws of blood. Don't worry, we'll skip it. I know I'm doing something radical here, not going in the natural order. And then there's other things to talk about regarding the laws of kashrut, the laws of bugs, the laws of milk products, etc. We're going to go back to that. And of course, the mixing of meat and milk, but which is everybody's question. How long do I have to wait after eating meat before having milk? The laws of bishul goyim, pat akum, etc. We mentioned them before. But then there's another topic which I think I want to cover now, particularly. Two topics, actually, because I'm looking ahead at the calendar and seeing that we're approaching Pesach. And there's, around Pesach time, almost every Jewish home goes through somewhat either one of these two halachot. And that's what I'd like to cover with you now. And then we'll go back to our regularly scheduled programming. After that, the two halachot that I'm referring to is hachsharat kelim, when you have vessels which are non-kosher, or milk or meat, and you want to get the milk or meat which is absorbed in them, you want to get it out. And before Pesach, if you have chametz, which entered the vessels, absorbed by the vessels, you want to use them on Pesach, so you have to go through a process called kosherizing, hachsharat kelim. And there's lots of rules about how to make a kitchen kosher. Bottom line is, it applies throughout the year. If you enter into a new home, a rental, or you buy a home, and they didn't keep kosher in the kitchen, how do you kosher that kitchen? How do you make it kosher? This is a very practical question around Pesach time because everybody has chametz during the year in their kitchens and they have to get rid of it before Pesach. And the alternative to that is the laws of, you could say, oh, my dishes, I don't want to make them kosher. Or some dishes I can't make them kosher. So what do you do nowadays? You buy new dishes that are kosher. There's a law that you have to do with new dishes too. And what am I talking about? Dip them in the mikvah. Tevilat kelim. So these are two topics to cover with you because really before Pesach, a lot of people, they take the easy route and they don't kosher their dishes. Maybe they will kosher their oven because it's very expensive to buy a new oven. But the dishes, they'll say, it's not worth it for me to go through the whole process. And there's boiling hot water, maybe there's a fire. It's just too much trouble. So just buy, disposable, of course, is bad for the environment. Shh. Shouldn't do that. But some people, so you buy new dishes. Dishes nowadays are much cheaper. They come from China. Come from China. It was owned by a non-Jew. There's a special law that you have to dip them in the mikvah before used by a Jew. So we're going to learn those laws with your permission. The laws of tevilat kelim and hachsharat kelim. I'll write the words on the board. So tevilah is immersing. Tevilat kelim. That's tevilah, which is immersing dishes. Tevilat kelim. And the second, more extensive laws are called hachshara. You see the word kosher in there? Hachsharat kelim, which is, I don't have a better word than kashewing, which is a sort of a Yiddishism into English. Kashewing vessels. Kelim are vessels. Kelim, toiveling is another way, the Yiddish way for saying that. Which is okay. Tovel. The word in Hebrew is tovel. Tevilah, right? Tevilah. So immersing vessels and kashering vessels. That's what we're going to cover in the next month. It would probably take us a few weeks to cover this stuff. So it's chapter 31 in the book that I'm holding of Pnei Halacha, the laws of Kashrut, and we'll come back and talk about all the more controversial stuff later. Immersing vessels, and hachsharat is koshering vessels. Question? Someone else had a question here? Moshe?
Yeah, well, I had a very quick anecdote. I know that if you have something that you can't immerse, like an electric coffee maker, one of the ways you get around it is you sell it to a goy, and you just have it in your home. David Bradley has an adopted son who's not Jewish, and he was telling me a story about how one of their neighbors got a new coffee maker, so they sold it to him. Yeah. And he said, I wonder if I went to their house and asked them to use their coffee maker, and they would let it. David told him, and this was in front of me, on the contrary, not only would they let you, but they would probably encourage you to use it because it mamish makes it more
real, makes it more real, not just
really
a fictional
sale.
Yeah. Interesting. We're going to learn about that. It is a loophole. It is you only have to tovel dishes that belong to a Jew. If they don't belong to a Jew, then you don't have an obligation to immerse them. And you can still use them. We're going to see all those laws when we get into the nitty-gritty of the laws of tevilat kelim.
What about if you have a dish that you bought from the store here? Because some of them probably aren't toiveled and everything at all.
Correct.
Not toiveled, you still buy them from the
Right.
you still got to toivel yourself.
Correct. There's many stores. I know there are in Borough Park, but right just down the store, I know it can tell you how to get there. On Kanfei Nesharim, there's a store that sells like housewares and all kinds of housewares, but including dishes, pots and pans. And right outside the store, they have a mikvah.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Very convenient. Kanfei Nesharim.
What's it called?
I'm not sure. I forget. Something Zol. I don't know what it's called. But maybe Zolstock. Maybe that's what it is. We could maybe one day.
Please.
Anyways, so anything, what I'd like to clarify is that these are two different concepts, independent of each other, even though they're learned from the same verses in the Chumash. Let's open them up, the Chumash. Everybody take a Chumash and open up, please, to Sefer Bamidbar. It's called the Book of Numbers in English, chapter 31, verse 21. That's Bamidbar, Lamed Aleph. There's enough for everybody, I hope. If not, you can share. Lamed Aleph, verse 21.
21?
I'll make to the page.
The page.
I'll open it.
Oh, perfect. 316.
10 plus 10.
I know, I understand, but it's so weird to read it. Should be Hebrew or should be Arabic? What you said?
Did they not teach you this in school?
I think it's
It's
okay.
supposed to be in school.
I can read the letters, but it's just
The Roman numerals are very difficult.
They taught this to me in school.
I'm glad you had it. That's it. Wasn't a Jewish school, but it doesn't matter. Roman numerals. Perek Lamed Aleph, Pasuk Chaf Aleph, page 316 in these volumes. You may have heard about this, or you may have not, but at one point there was a nation that was called Amalek. You heard of that? We don't have any more Amalekites. We talked about it in the other class. There was another nation called the Canaanites. You heard of them? We don't have Canaanites anymore. There's another nation called Jebusites. Have you seen any Jebusites lately? I looked in the United Nations list of nations. It's not there. There's another nation. You saw? Yeah, Ariel?
Well, wasn't one of the nations of the Canaanites survived and they
I don't know.
they joined B'nai Israel, no?
The Givonites, yes. Givonites. There's- But even that today, they've either, if they join the people of Israel, then they're just Israelites. They're not. There's no Givonites that I see. So there's another nation, one of these ancient nations, which fought against the Jewish people. One I'm referring to is called the Midianites. Midian. So a few stories about the Midianites. Yitro was a Midianite. What else was there a story about?
Son of Abraham with Keturah, the woman.
Remember Weinberg?
So, yeah.
There's one
Keturah, yeah. Keturah. What about Keturah? What does that have to do with Midian?
The woman.
Keturah was a Midianite?
The mother of Midian.
She was the mother of Midian. Right, good. That's where Midian came from. Correct, very good. What? There's another story about
Gideon.
Ruth? Well, she was from Moab.
Oh,
Moab, not Midian.
And the Shimonite, Shimon and Pinchas. The Midian.
That's right, there was a Midianite woman. That's right. And then there was a story of Bilam,
Yes.
who was hired by
King of Midian.
the king of Midian to curse the Jewish people. So there's quite a few stories with the Midianites. And then after all these stories happen, in the book of Numbers, chapter 30, the Torah commands Moshe. Moshe gets commanded, go and fight against the nation of Midian. And who won? Who won?
Jews.
Of course, Moshe never loses. Moshe's come on. Moshe's the best, right? So they win the war, and then they take the spoils. And the spoils include dishes, pots and pans, gold, silver, which was used, copper, all sorts of different types of metals. And now the Jewish people want to use them. Wait a minute, what's the problem? 2 mitzvot that we have to do with them. And here it is, verse 21, chapter 31, verse 21. Elazar says to the people, Elazar, the son of Aaron, says to the men of war which went into battle, this is the ordinance of the law. Zot chukat haTorah asher tzivah Hashem et Moshe. Verse 22. Who can read for me?
Verse 22.
Verse 22, Michael, go for it.
Me.
Yeah,
Compared to 1, right?
22.
20.
you're in the wrong pair.
Oh, so Yossi, read for us, please.
English will be
English, please.
And Eleazar the priest said unto the men of war which went to the battle, this is the ordinance of the law which the Lord commanded Moses. Only the gold and the silver, the brass, the iron, the tin, and the lead.
So these are different forms of metal. There's every form of metal we learn out from here. Go ahead, what about it?
Everything that passes through the fire, you shall make it go through the fire, and it shall be clean. Nevertheless, it shall be purified with water of sprinkling. And all that passes not through the fire, you shall make go through the water.
Okay, go ahead. One more.
And you shall wash your clothes on the seventh day, and you shall be clean, and afterward you shall come into the camp. And the Lord spoke to Moses.
Okay, stop there. Stop. That's the beginning of the next section. Okay, so it's a little bit cryptic, but we seem to have 3 laws in verse 23. One is everything that goes through fire has to go through fire. What that means is that the way to get to kosher a vessel, if it was used with fire, a fry pan, a skewer, a barbecue, right? You have a fire, a skillet, the grate. It's used with fire with non-kosher food. The Midianites didn't keep kosher. They didn't do shechita. They didn't learn the laws of treifot with Rav Menachem. They didn't even know how to separate out the forbidden fats and the gid hanasher, right? So all these vessels absorb the taste of non-kosher. But now a Jew wants to use them. So you have to kosher them. How do you kosher them? With fire. Everything was used with fire. You put it through fire. It's called libun. Very good, Thomas says. It's called libun. We're going to learn that word in greater detail later on. Okay, that's the beginning of verse 23. The end of verse 23 says, all that passes not through the fire. Just going to make it go through the water. What's that called?
So hot water or?
Hot water, yeah, hot water. Haga'ala, very good. That's if you have a pot. A pot, you don't put food in it without water. Right? You just make a soup in a pot. A pot that's on the fire with water in it. So it absorbed the taste of the non-kosher meat through the water. And so the way to make it kosher is by boiling up hot water in it. That's called hag'ala. 2 methods so far of number 2, of hachsharat kilim. Okay, we're going to see that those are the 2 major methods of kashering vessels. But we're starting off with tevilat kilim. That appears in the middle of the verse. In the middle of the verse. It says, nevertheless it shall be purified with the water of sprinkling. What's the water of sprinkling? It's actually in Hebrew, it's called Menida. What's a nida?
Impurity. Impure
What?
woman.
Right? A menstruating woman, right? Nida. It's called a woman who menstruates. What are the waters of a menstruating woman?
Mikvah.
Mikvah. The waters which a menstruating woman use in order to become purified, you have to purify these vessels. That's mitzvah number 1, tevilat kelim. So it's learned out from this verse that in the same verse you learn out both laws. The laws of hachsharat kelim, making it kosher, getting all the absorbed taste out, but also that you must immerse the vessel in a mikvah called Menida. You have to, in order for a Jew to use this vessel after it was owned by a non-Jew, you have to, now, you know, it's a beautiful idea. There's a book called Waters of Eden by Rabbi Aryeh Kaplan where he describes this idea of what is mikvah. Mikvah, we see that throughout the Torah it's used for transitions. Even a Kohen, before he serves in the temple, he had to go into the mikvah. He was a Kohen before and he's a Kohen afterwards. It's the way Jews do transitions. Okay? There's many circumstances where, to signify the transgression, you go into the mikvah waters. Some people explain that the mikvah, it has to be 40 sa'ahs of water. It's about 200 plus liters. Usually we make them bigger nowadays, but it's big enough to immerse your entire body inside. What's an entire body immersed inside a body of water? Similar to the mother's womb. And it's essentially, people can't survive underwater. Essentially, it's a form of death. You come out of the mikvah waters, come back to breathe once again, it's almost like being reborn. Bad connotations to that word in terms of other societies, but to be reborn Jew, not a born again, but a born again Jew. That
misinterpret that when they stole it?
No.
I don't know. But that is one interpretation of what the mikvah waters do, is that symbolically, maybe even spiritually, you become a new type of person. We're talking about vessels. The vessel was used by non-Jews. There's nothing wrong with non-Jews, but they're not on the high level. What does a Jew do? A Jew tries to bring all of his life to holiness, to spirituality. The non-Jews don't have the 613 mitzvot. They're not playing in the same league. They're not playing in the same game that we are. And so if you want to bring a vessel that was owned by a non-Jew, and you want to bring it into the service of the Jewish people, you're going to be eating your food from these vessels. They have to be elevated to the status of Jewish vessels, meaning that they're dedicated to everything that the Jewish people are dedicated to. The way we do that is by transitioning them. You put them in a mikvah, you take them out, and they are ready to be used by a Jew. Now, it could be many vessels. Sometimes you need both processes. Like in Midian, they needed both, because the vessels were used by Midianites for non-kosher food, and they belonged to non-Jews, and now they're going to be used by Jews. So you had to do two. Can someone give me an example of when you would have to do only one of these two processes?
Accidental mixing of milk and meat, like if you.
Right. Okay.
So if you had a
Okay. Good.
already kosher, you just accidentally put. Milk
More importantly, it's always belonged to a Jew.
Yeah, it was one between.
So the only thing you have to worry about is the kosher. What were you going to say, Russ?
I wonder if you just bought like a new clean vessel from the store that perhaps was made in a country.
China, let's say. Just for example. I don't know why I brought that example. Popped into my head. What is it? 90% of the vessels, things today are made in China? Most Chinese are not Jewish. I have a few Chinese students that are Jewish, but they're definitely a minority. Anyways, so yes, you're absolutely right. Russell's correct. You buy new dishes. There's no non-kosher taste in them. They're still in the plastic. They were in the factory. No non-kosher meat was used by them. And so you don't have to do number 2, koshering the vessels. You still have to do number 1, toveling the dishes. And the opposite, Moshe also said, let's say, I'll say it simpler. You can make, a Jew owns a factory to make vessels, to make pots and pans, cutlery. You don't have to put it in the mikvah. But if you used it by accident with non-kosher meat, or meat and milk got mixed, absorbed into this vessel, you have to kosher it. So each one, they don't always apply. The case of the Torah was talking about where both applied. Okay, you had a question, Ravi.
Yes, I wonder if you buy dishes or vessels and you want to kosher in the water, is it a job for the man or for the woman?
Interesting.
Because
So,
I remember when I had been in Amsterdam, there was a woman living alone, and she called me, I bought new dishes, please come to me and to kosher.
it's an interesting question. We're going to learn the details. The bottom line is that it applies to both men and women equally. What you probably what happened to you though is that it's quite a physical job, and sometimes men are a little bit stronger, and it's hard for a woman to do the entire job by herself. And so maybe she asked for your assistance. But technically, if she would take the vessels to the mikvah, that's fine. And if she were to do the process of kashering the vessels, that's also fine. It doesn't have to be done by a man. Yeah, another question, Hirsch.
So it says kosherit, or how do you pronounce it?
Hachshara. Hachsharat. Kelim. And yes?
What about, say, it's been made by Jews, for a reason it's been sold by Goyim?
It's a problem. Yeah. Because if anywhere along the chain of supply it was in non-Jewish ownership, has to be elevated when it comes into the service of a Jew for eating. We're going to talk about all the details, which vessels you need to kosher, which vessels you don't, which need to tovel, which you don't need to tovel. But if it was owned by a non-Jew anywhere along the supply chain, even if it was a Jewish factory, but then they sold it to a distributor who's a non-Jew, you have to do tevilat kelim. Yes?
Is there a mikvah like nearby?
Yes. Over there. I can't show you exactly where, but there is. Yes. Ruven.
So I want to see if I want to be sure I understand kind of the types and process. So you've got one type, fryer or a skillet, anything that's used, when cooking with fire. What you do with that is to kasher vessels, you kasher with fire.
Correct.
And what does that mean, kasher with fire? Does it just put it over the fire for a certain amount of time?
We're going to learn all those rules.
Okay, then the second thing is pots and other things that you use when cooking.
With water.
Water, soups, and
Yes.
things like that.
Mhm.
You kasher it by boiling water.
Mm-hmm.
And then for all of them,
Or not at all. A separate mitzvah.
okay, if they were previously owned by a non-Jew,
Correct.
then they go through the mikvah.
That's right.
But if they were previously owned by a Jew, then you don't need to go through.
Correct.
Okay, and then
Good summary.
And then utensils.
Same. We're going to learn to what type of vessels does this apply. Bottom line is anything used with food. All the utensils used with directly that come into contact with food. Cutlery, knives, spoons. Can opener is a good question. It's no, those are the two exceptions. Right? You're smart, Moshe. Very right. You got right to the exceptions. They don't actually touch the food. Or the can opener and the wine corker doesn't actually touch the food.
Because I use the old.
We follow the majority of the use. So if the majority of the use is not with touching food, so then also they say there's room to be lenient about a pen knife. You know what's that called? When you go camping, you have one of these Swiss Army knife type of thing.
Yes.
Some people say that sometimes, if you're out camping, there's a little fork or a spoon, right? One of those things you open up. Can you use that without toveling it? Some people say yes, because its majority is just for like fixing things and using a knife. But if there's room to be lenient, say you don't have to do tevilat kelim.
It's generally sold as a utensil. So.
Yeah, but the entire utensil has to be toveled together. Multipurpose tool. Yeah, the majority is used for opening up or cutting things. Yeah.
So I didn't catch forks, knives, spoons. Do they fall under fire or boiling water?
We're going to see those details, but most forks and knives are not used on the fire. Unless you have got like one of those things for a barbecue. It's one of those big forks for turning over the meat on the barbecue. So then that would need fire. But a fork that you use daily for your hot meat, then that's never on the fire. So good enough to put it into boiling hot water.
So you just put it. Okay.
We're gonna learn the details about how to do all this.
Okay.
This is the big picture. You got it. You got it. Yes, you can summarize well. Micha.
Yeah, because I also want to imagine, because cannot imagine how that's being done about the fire process. Like with the fire flame and they just like put it like.
We're gonna learn the details. We're gonna lead this. Moshe.
As part of this class, can we actually go out to a store, get some new vessels, and go to a mikvah?
We will. Each and every one of us will be involved in this mitzvah, and that's why I'm learning them with you now. Before Pesach, because these laws are taken out to the streets. Many people don't want to do them by themselves at home because they don't know all the laws, or they don't trust themselves, or it's just inconvenient. They don't have a big enough pot. And you're going to see on street corners, in town, in every neighborhood, people that the day or 2 days before, 3 days before Pesach, they're doing this in public. So you're all going to see it, whether you personally have any vessels or not. You walk around town, you'll see this being done, and you'll know the laws because we're going to learn about them starting tomorrow. Okay?
We're gonna learn the ones about people twiddling.
Also toveling and also kashering. 2 separate topics.
Well, I heard that to kosher a sink, you need to boil a hot pot of water. And
Depends
pour
what the
all
sink
that
is
water.
made of. There's lots of rules.